This week, I did not want to be a preacher in this church or any church. I'm still cursing my mother, who loved to talk about history and politics at our dinner table growing up and challenge us to be involved. I am the inheritor of her priorities. Some of the stories I will tell, bits and pieces, some of you have heard before. I had to go back to some seminal narratives in my own life. I am 66 years old and have functioned in the middle of sexual politics my whole life. I shared my mother's womb with my twin brother, who was born 13 minutes ahead of me. And we were born into a family and a slice of American culture that especially favored investing in and supporting boys and men, especially favored my brother. When my father's real estate business faltered in our senior year of high school and there wasn't enough money, it was announced to me that I would not be going to college. My brother would go because someday he would support a family. But I was persevering and creative, and I found my way and I learned to navigate the world. Now, mind you, I did come from a fair amount of privilege with a lot of resources to figure out how to do that. But I landed at university, and in 1971, I helped abolish the Associated Women's Students Organization, of which I was an elected member, in favor of full participation by women in all the university's governing bodies. A year later, a year before Roe v. Wade, I was the driving force behind an interdisciplinary undergraduate course in human sexuality that included collaboration with the medical school and the sociology department, the history department, the art department, the law school, and the School of Social Work. It was a course that had been approved of by the University Senate and the faculty, and that first year, not surprisingly, given the title, A Course in Human Sexuality, and the university context, this undergraduate course had thousands sign up. And the only way we could figure out how to choose the 400 that there was room for in the class was, sadly, to make their entrance based on their grade point averages. Fast forward to 1991, I was 3 months out of seminary, and I sat riveted to the TV screen during the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill hearings before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And among family and friends for weeks after that, we tried to piece together and to parse what had happened. So this week was a combination of deja vu and an invitation yet again to some PTSD moments. Now, this is not my Me Too moment, although if you want to talk about stories, you can call and make an appointment with me, because I have also experienced more than once being falsely accused in my life, and out of shame or confusion or a need for privacy, let claims go unchallenged that resurfaced years later, needing to be reviewed. As an ordained person, I'm a public figure, and it just goes with the territory. Most of all, from the privileged position of pastor to so many people over the last 27 years in the church, I have heard the stories of women and men who have been physically and sexually violated by another human being. And every time it cuts me close to the bone, and it makes me raw and deeply sad when I hear of similar traumas. So this has been a bad week for me, and I dare say for those who love me. But these are the times we live in, and this is the place where we live. And for better or worse, I am the preacher today. So here is my sermon. The good news I want to proclaim today is that one person can make a difference. I love the story in the Old Testament. I love the story of Esther. I love how it inspired me back in 1987 and how it has challenged me since. Thank you, John, for that good reading. I was so looking forward to this cycle of scripture and the chance to pray and to preach about Esther. And so I was incredibly miffed at the surrounding events at the vote on our Supreme Court nominee this week that threatened to tank my opportunity. Because right away I said, oh, this is just way too political. I have had some sleepless nights this week wrestling with this and praying and seeking the wisdom that the story might have to offer us. And I will try to be gentle because most of all, my deepest hope is that St. John's can continue to be a place where, not of unhealthy political battles, not a place of unhealthy political battles, but a place of sanctuary. As an aside, in the early weeks of our current president's term, both Joe and I noticed that there was some angst in the community among parishioners and some harsh, or perhaps better said, difficult conversations. And in each case that we knew of, civility prevailed. And if there were apologies to be made, literally, parishioners of their own volition found each other and made them. I consider this a hallmark of a Christian faith community where we can claim what is most important from our baptismal covenant to respect the dignity of every human being, and where we can participate in what Jesus invites us to, which is to forgive and love and forgive and love, and practice what the church bids us, to see ourselves as sinners, as always falling short, except perhaps on those rare occasions when, by God's grace, we are able to rise above ourselves and to love others as God has loved us. Above all, I hope that we can continue to be that kind of community while not shrinking from the real conversations, the intersections of faith and life that are set before us. So I don't have a good joke today. There were no New Yorker cartoons. But I want to tell you two stories. One from the Bible, the book of Esther, and one from real life. So first, from the book of Esther. Esther was a beautiful woman, one of the wives of Ahasuerus, actually known in the Persian culture as Xerxes, one of the wives of Xerxes I of the Achaemenid Empire in the 5th century BC. Esther was a Jewish woman. Her family had been captured in the 6th century BC in Judah, and they had been a part of the Babylonian exile, resettled over in Susa, the town where she lived. After the former queen, Xerxes' first queen, had been ordered to appear in his court and had refused, she had been thrown out, and Esther had been chosen along with other virgins to be among his new wives. And because she was his favorite, she became the new queen. The king did not know that she was a Jewish woman. And then, with the help of Mordecai, who was her uncle, she endeared herself to the king even further because she revealed to him a plot to kill him. And thus the plot was foiled and his life was saved. But after the plot, the king promoted an officer named Haman to be above all of his other officials for security purposes. And Haman began to demand personally of all citizens obeisance to him, that they bow to him. And when Mordecai, Esther's uncle, and a good Jew, did not bow down to him because he was unwilling to show obeisance to anyone except God, Haman was infuriated and vowed to destroy all Jews in the kingdom of Xerxes. He launched his plot against the Jews without naming them, addressing the king thusly: There is a people scattered and separated among all the peoples and all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not appropriate for the king to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued for their destruction." And so the king ordered the decree. Esther, from inside the king's courts, using her influence, perhaps her beauty and her wile, using her own ways, revealed in today's lessons, she used her own ways to gain the king's favor and to save her people from sure genocide, with the ironic twist that Haman was the one executed on the very gallows that had been built for Mordecai. Did you follow that? Now, over the years, Jewish and Christian scholars have bristled at this sort of part historical, part wisdom book in the Old Testament, saying that it lacks kindness and mercy and forgiveness. Or they have lamented that it is vengeful and bloodthirsty and chauvinistic. It certainly highlights the way intrigue, deceit, and hate abound in any court or government or among people. And that in that, it may shed some light on our current national political climate. But for me, it also highlights how one person can make a difference, and how, given the reality of circumstances, God can be at work so that destruction can be avoided and good can prevail. The story of Esther, 9 chapters nestled between Nehemiah and Job in the Old Testament, mentions God not once, but tells a tale of faithful people functioning in their version of the public square. One person can make a difference. My second story is from real life. I think some of you have heard it in one context or another before, but it bears repeating today, so if you will, listen. It's a story for which I give credit to my husband, Stephen, and for the story itself, but also for his courage and cleverness and his willingness to try to make a difference. The year was 1977. The setting was West Kentucky. The federal housing project in Murray, Kentucky, Callaway County was segregated and headed by Mr. J.D. McCutcheon, who wanted to keep it that way. Whites only over here, blacks only over there. The whites only part of the housing project had a beautiful senior citizen center. The senior citizens who were black were considered part of the Douglas community with no center to go to and forbidden to go to the fancy white center. The Senior Citizens Board, which was integrated, had only one integrated program, the softball league, where everybody had a great time playing against each other and against other teams, and it became the beacon of hope. Now, the members of the board really wanted all programs to be integrated and to take place in the main community center building, but the housing director, old J.D., who had been very instrumental in raising the money and then supervising the building of the community center, well, he opposed the idea. So Stephen, as chairman of the Senior Citizens Board, and along with other board members, made a plan. He wrote a letter to the Atlanta Housing Authority, the regional headquarters and place of distribution of the funds for both programs, for the housing program and the senior citizens program. And he waxed eloquent, thanking them for all the help that they had given in the past to the senior citizens program in Murray and Callaway County. He copied Mr. J.D. McCutcheon on that letter. Mr. J.D. McCutcheon, the housing director, he wanted to put him on notice that someone else in the neighborhood knew how government worked and where the funding came from. Stephen also knew that old J.D. knew that federal law prohibited segregation of in these local programs. So once the letter went out, the Senior Citizens Board organized a whole year of integrated programs to take place at the main community center, hoping to eliminate altogether that Black Douglas Center. And then they set out and chose a date for the program year's kickoff party to be held in the all-whites community center in the whites-only portion of the housing project. Invitations went out. Everyone received an invitation for 10:30 in the morning on a Saturday. All the senior citizens were invited and were asked to invite their families, some of whom played softball together. All the members of the city council were invited, and most of those folks had parents who were in the program. And all the justices of the peace and the county judges and the state representatives were invited. Also, the leaders of both civic organizations and public and private institutions. Churches were invited. Senior citizens from nearby counties, especially Paducah, Kentucky, where the largest percentage of the senior citizens in their program were Black, they got an invitation. So, the day of the event arrived. People began streaming into the community center, Black and white folks from all over the county who knew each other from many different contexts and greeted one another. Paducah's Senior Citizens Program brought a whole bus full of mostly Black folks. The locally famous kazoo band that performed once a year for the governor was in rare form. County judges, the state senator arrived, and all the members of the Douglas community were there. Now, one invitation had gone out that noted that the party was to begin at 11:30 in the morning, not 10:30. That invitation went to Mr. J.D. McCutcheon, the housing director. At 11:15, Stephen positioned himself strategically at the front door and waited. And at 11:25 a.m., a big Black limousine pulled up, and out came the housing director, old J.D. And as he started to up the walkway and got ready to enter the community center, it took him no time to get the picture. Everyone was there, Black and white together. They were all having a great time. There was good food and good music playing. It was a wonderful event. There were dignitaries there from government and business, men and women, young and old, Black and white. When Stephen put out his hand to welcome the housing director, old J.D., well, he did not respond. But his glance could have killed. Stephen swears that if J.D. had had a shotgun that day, he'd have been shot dead. But as it was, J.D. walked right past Stephen's outstretched hand and walked right into that room, and he raised both of his hands in the air, and with the biggest smile you've ever seen, he said, "Welcome, everybody." Stephen says J.D. was abiding by the old West Kentucky axiom, when you see the steamroller coming, best to lie down. Times changed, and all the housing and senior citizens programs in Murray, Kentucky, and Callaway County have been integrated ever since. I was there and saw it for myself just 3 years ago. One person can make a difference. Amen.